Next speaker is Peter Barkema, Early Visual Cortex encodes multisensory post-dictive perception with retinotopic specificity, a layer-specific fMRI study.
Thank you. I shortened the title a little bit for you. All right, thank you everyone for coming and choosing this session instead of the beach today. I would have done the same thing, and as you can see, I actually did. I want to talk to you today about a really cool thing which is called postdiction. Some of you might have heard about it, and what it can teach us about the role of visual cortex in perception. So postdiction is this really cool phenomenon where later incoming information influences a percept. So it's the idea that perception is not really this live stream, but it's constructed post-hoc. I recommend reading up about it. It's pretty relevant in philosophy of consciousness too, and it's a free existential crisis. The neural mechanisms, however, are not much known about, and this is one of the first fMRI studies on this. So here's an example which is called the color-phi illusion by Colas and von Grunau, and it's pretty simple. So you show a blue disk on one side of the screen, and after a red disk on the other side. But what people perceive is this blue disk moving from the left to the right and turning into this illusion. And the question to ask is, how can someone perceive a red disk in the middle if it hasn't been shown yet? It's only possible if this has been inferred after the fact. So there must have been an overlap in processing of these two stimuli in the brain and also an overlap in time. So how could this work? Well, there's two neural hypotheses that were proposed by Noelle Stiles, who I think is excitingly here in the room with us today, and Tangre and Shimojo. And if we'd apply it to these illusions, it would go something like this. It's a feed forward where the blue disk travels upstream, and through recurrence, it lingers long enough in these upstream visual areas to be combined and overlap into this illusion. And then there's a feedback hypothesis where something similar happens, but instead of it staying upstream, there's a feedback mechanism on early visual cortex which allows the illusion to be inferred in early visual cortex. The illusion we use is a bit more general, and it's auditory induced, which prevents some problems that this illusion has. So we use, and it travels also upstream after that, which means there is a testable difference in early visual cortex between these two models, which is perfect for the fMRI analysis that we wanted to do. So we use this illusion to circumvent it. So this is the audiovisual rabbit illusion that has been proposed by Noelle Stiles et al. And what happens is that we present a sound and a flash at the same time, and then a sound, and then another sound and flash. What people actually see is an illusion in the middle. And this illusion is provenly postdictive, because if you alter the last stimulus, the last flash beat pair, you can alter the location of the illusion. And the question we ask is, does primary visual cortex then encode what's presented, these two flashes, or what's actually perceived, these three flashes? And just to put it in this earlier framework, this can help us decide whether it's more likely that it is feed-forward, this feed-forward explanation for the audiovisual rabbit illusion, or this feedback, which might be coming from, for example, superior temporal cortex or hippocampus as multisensory regions. So this is our experimental design. We have three conditions where either we show no flash in the middle, we show a sound in the middle, inducing an illusion, or we show a flash and a beep in the middle as control. And we ask, how many flashes do you see? 2 or 3? How confident are you in your answer? We have 4 times 104 trials during 70 fMRI and 23 participants, and we analyzed 23 participants because one moved too much. So these flashes are super small, and we used retinotopic mapping to allow us to ask a more precise hypothesis. So we use population receptive field mapping and try to find out for each part of the brain what part of the visual screen activates it the most. And we could use this for each of these flashes to select all the voxels that are sort of fine-tuned to this location, so where the flashes are within its receptive field. And we also have a control location to compare. So here you see for one participant the voxels that would be selected for each location. And of course we care particularly about the second flash location where the illusion is shown. But we can be even more precise with 70 fMRI. So Rowan Ballard already noted that deep layers in visual cortex mainly receive this top-down information, and what we see as this perceptual modulation. And the middle layers mainly bottom up, so in our case, maybe the retinal input. So we separate our data into 3 acrovoluminous categories of the visual cortex into deep, middle, and superficial. And then we expect the deep layers to mainly reflect this perception. So does this illusion even work in a scanner, was our first big question. So we see that if no flash is shown, people almost always see 2 flashes. And if a real flash is shown, it's 3 flashes. And people are respectively very confident in the correct answer here. So what's up with the illusion? Well, if you add a sound to this no flash condition, you indeed have a very high occurrence of flashes within these participants. And I should say they're recruited for high susceptibility. So about half of the population you might find this. And you see that the confidence decreases in 2 flashes and it increases in 3 flashes. So the specific neural analysis that we wanted to do was univariate. We expected an illusion to evoke similar activation in early visual cortex as a real stimulus. So we select all the voxels fine-tuned to approximately this red square, and with a control location in the top as well. And so our hypothesis was that for no flash, there would be little neural activation in this flash 2 location, for an illusion an increase, and for a real flash a high activation. And although we did find that the real flash had a significant increase in activation, we did not find this to the illusion. But there is still the multivariate approach that we had up our sleeve. So we again used this, the flash 2 location and a control location. And what we did was we measured whether the voxel during the illusory condition encode perception or the retinal input. And to be more precise, we asked, do the illusory neural responses look more like the responses to a real flash or the responses to no flash? And of course, in a control we expect a neutral response. And what was really cool is that we found that in the voxels fine-tuned to the second flash location, the deep layers had a significant, there's a little star there, within deep layers there's a significant increase, which means that the illusion, the voxels encoded information that was more like a real flash than to no flash. And in line with this, we saw that middle layers had the opposite effect. So within middle layers, the information that the voxels were encoding was more like no flash, more like the retinal input that we might expect coming into middle layers. And you see quite a stark contrast between the 2 layers. And importantly, in the control, we didn't see any of these, the control location, I should say, we didn't see any of these effects. So we try to explore where this information is coming from. We didn't find much in the hippocampus, but we did find, and I should say that we had to increase the flash location because trial by trial betas are a lot more noisy. And so we looked at the connection between superior temporal cortex and deep layers and middle layers, and we saw that superior temporal cortex shared more of this perceptual information with deep layers than with middle layers, which is indicative of that there might be this perceptual information or perceptual modulation from superior temporal cortex top down on visual cortex. And importantly, we didn't see this in the control location yet again. So we have a twofold conclusion that we can draw from this. And if I lost you once I got up this stage, now is the time to pay attention. So we find support that postdictive perception is facilitated by top-down connections to deep layers of primary visual cortex coming from superior temporal cortex. And we find the support in this multivariate analysis within the flash 2 location, as well as in this informational connectivity that was increased in deep layers to middle layers. So in the framework that we started with, we find support for a feedback model of multisensory regions modulating V1 visual cortex information and against the feed-forward model. But there's a second conclusion to be derived from this. And this is in line with the work that was earlier done by Peter Koch and colleagues, where deep layers of primary visual cortex encode perception. And we find now, and they use the kinesia illusion, which is a different illusion, but we find now that even this is the case when auditory induced illusions are constructed post-hoc. what I would view as quite a general form of perception. And this really points to this quite general and emerging importance of early visual cortex in visual subjective experience. And all the while, middle layers seem to be encoding more the retinal input, which begs the question how this information might be integrated across layers. What's also interesting is that our first analysis did not show this effect. So the visual cortex amplitude instead reflects this retinal input, which is more in line with Brode de Veer et al., where they showed that if there's a visual stimulus, it might drive this initial amplitude peak, but the lingering perception is actually reflected in the lingering information content in neuroactivity. So I'd like to acknowledge a huge thanks to my supervisor Peter Kok, who didn't need a picture since he's moderating the session. There's also Joost Haarsma, who helped me a lot with analyses and with the project, and Christoph Koenig, a master student who's done a lot of data collection, and the Expectations Lab at the Phil, and the MRI teams that helped me through all the imaging. So there's no published work on this yet. You're the first to hear it here. So if you're, whether you find this really exciting or you're really critical or somewhere in between, please come talk to me or to Peter, because we'll be around at VSS. All right, thanks a lot for your attention.
We have time for questions.
Hello. Really nice talk. So I wondered, did you look at the univariate activity layer by layer? And what was the result? And if you didn't see any difference in the univariate activity layer by layer, what do you think is the informational content that you're picking up on in the multivariate analysis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I also forgot to mention that we didn't see any layer-specific univariate effects. So it's good that you mentioned that. And we haven't completely finished our interpretation yet, so this is exactly the question that we're trying to address now. And so one thing that is, of course, an option is that we don't have that we simply don't have the signal strength for an amplitude increase, to find this amplitude increase, but I don't think that's the case because we actually see more of a numerical decrease, which is even more puzzling. Some things that we're looking at is, for example, there might be a relative increase within the illusory condition between the flashes, so there might be sort of a surround suppression effect going on, but we haven't also found no evidence for this. So now at the moment we're tinkering around with various questions and various ways there might be sort of, maybe there's a top-down effect that doesn't completely reach some parts of visual cortex, and there might be maybe a univariate increase is found a little higher, so maybe there'd be something with eccentricity, or there's all these different more post-hoc analysis that we're doing to explore this, but I don't really have an answer for you at the moment.
Okay,
but I am wondering
you.
about the suppression very much actually. So.
Yeah, thanks, nice work.
Thank you.